Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Marc Lauritsen, legal knowledge architect and original legal tech innovator, whose trailblazing work in document automation and AI has shown us all what's possible. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. My name is Tom Martin. I'll be your host. And my guest for today is Marc Lauritsen. I'm very excited to have him on the show because he has a wealth of experience and a lot of experience in particular with document automation and AI early on, and can tell us about what that journey's been like. And of course, we're going to get into generative AI and all that. I'm really excited to have him on the show. He's the president of Capstone Practice Systems. He's also a former poverty lawyer. He's directed and taught in clinical programs at Harvard Law School, of which he's a graduate of Harvard Law School, before that MIT, and a double major at MIT, actually, where philosophy and music. I'm a philosophy major, so close to my heart. Also, he's been a fellow of the College of Law Practice Management, past co-chair of the American Bar Association e-lawyering task force, and author of The Lawyer's Guide to Working Smarter with Knowledge Tools. So can you imagine how excited I am, because we share a lot in common, and I'd love to learn from his experience as well. So Marc, pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Tom. Finally get a chance to talk face to face.
Fantastic, because I know that, like on Twitter and I think LinkedIn, we've exchanged likes and comments and stuff. So it's always great to meet a social media friend in person.
I'm very impressed by all your entrepreneurial activity in this space. It's very energizing to watch what you're doing.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear, because it's exhausting sometimes.
I was going to say, yeah, exhausting might be a better word for it.
I'm glad to hear that my exhaustion is energizing others.
There we go. That's the way it should be.
Well, I'll tell you what, before we get into actually going backwards to your early career, if you could tell us a little bit about, if you want to expand at all on my introduction, and then maybe let people know something you're working on recently.
Yeah, I tend to be a dilettante. I work on all different kinds of things simultaneously. My main day job is Capstone, as you mentioned. And we basically are a full-service legal consultancy that builds custom knowledge tools for law practice, whether it's law firms, law departments, or legal aids or courts, whatever the context may be. And then I moonlight as a law professor at Suffolk these days as an adjunct, teaching courses where students build apps as part of their coursework. So I'm kind of a proponent of this maker-style approach to legal education, a new form of experiential or clinical education, where rather than being in the lawyer role, you're in the role of the knowledge engineer, trying to impart legal knowledge, legal smarts to a machine to help people do legal work.
And, that's really needed, especially with students right now, because the cross-training is something that I think is just going to be table stakes going forward between law and technology, because it's just the way the world is now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, 10 years ago, we used to talk about learning how to code. Nowadays, it's really learning how to use machines that don't require you to code. But the key agenda really is understanding how we can offload some of the cognitive work that consists of being a lawyer to a machine, so we can help more people get their legal problems solved, their legal opportunities pursued.
100%. So let's jump back a little bit. I mean, you have a unique background in that, MIT. So going there, undergrad, and then Harvard Law School, that combination naturally lent itself to like a law and technology kind of combo there. Did you have some early exposure to technology that kind of like keyed you into wanting to go that direction, or how did that come about?
I was kind of your proverbial math and science geek in high school, but I was also a drum major and involved in a lot of music and rock bands. But I came to MIT really expecting to be a physicist or a mathematician or something, and then I quickly got disenchanted with technology, frankly. And I started taking all the courses in music, philosophy, literature, and history, and spent a year in Germany studying at the University of Freiburg in Breisgau. But when I got back, I found I could just package these courses I had taken into 2 degrees. So I got 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, one with a major in music and one with a major in philosophy. And with those degrees, I couldn't really get a real job. So I went to law school and I began the next part of my crazy career.
I think we had the same rationale in doing that. I mean, I guess the common wisdom is you either become a professor and go to get a PhD to go deep into that or not. But that's really interesting. It's not what I would expect. Like the fact that you did major in music and philosophy at MIT, and then having that thought, like, kind of a turn away from technology, coming back into it.
It's funny, because I didn't have much technology in law school back in those days, and I practiced for about 5 years and barely used computers. They really didn't exist pretty much the time I was doing that work. But then it came back with a vengeance, and I was teaching as a clinical teacher, running the clinical program at Harvard, and the school got this amazing grant from the Digital Equipment Corporation to explore how we could use modern technology to improve legal services, legal education. And I was like, wow, this is quite interesting. I've got a little background. I can understand this stuff. And next thing I knew, I had zagged my way into that kind of a career.
When did that funding come in?
That was in 1984, something called Project Pericles. And it lasted for 4 years. We got a monetary grant, but we also got equipment. So we got this VAX 11780 computer, which I think had a list price in those days of about $900,000. And it was a mini computer running the VAX VMS operating system. And that was our main toy to use for the next 4 years, building expert systems, building various online communication systems, computer-aided legal instruction, things of that nature. So it was a very heady time with some very antiquated machinery by today's perspectives.
Is it, like, just out of my own curiosity, I have a few follow-up questions, regardless of whether or not the audience wants to get this geeky. But one question is, like, how big was that machine? Was it taking up like a side of the room, or was it?
I think I only saw it once. It resided in the Harvard Science Center, so we had an Ethernet connection to it. It was probably the size of a modern refrigerator, quite substantial. And we had dumb terminals we used to interact with it. So we spread a number of these terminals around the clinics in our teaching labs, and just began hacking away on building apps and using it to do early stage email and computer conferencing.
Wow, that's fascinating. And also fascinating just for people that aren't as familiar, like the fact that we've kind of come full circle in that, it used to be that you would have a mainframe that would sit in a room somewhere, sometimes take up a whole building. And then you would have, like, a dumb display and keyboard that would connect to it. And then of course we transitioned in the 80s, 90s, and after that to personal computers at home that were self-contained. But now we've kind of come full circle.
Yeah, no, it's this oscillation of architecture of computing.
So when you're putting an expert system together, what were you using to do that? What kind of language were you?
There were a variety of languages, some native to the VAX environment from digital. They were pretty active in early expert system work. But we also we collaborated with Brigham Young University Law School out in Provo, which also had a VAX-based research project. And they developed something called CAPS, Computer Assisted Practice Systems. And there were 2 professors, a guy named Larry Farmer and a guy named Stan Nealman, who had developed a amazing authoring environment for building interactive practice systems that could generate documents and could guide a professional through the steps involved in doing work. So we managed to get a copy of that software, and that became our main platform. The CAPS was eventually released from Brigham Young to a startup company, and as you may know, CAPS was the predecessor to Hot Docs. So there was a continuous line of development and R&D around these kinds of tools that I kind of got dragged along with over the years.
So when was that available? CAPS, where you could create document automation?
Yeah, CAPS initially was running only on the VAX mini computers, but then they ported it to DOS. And so there was a MS-DOS version of CAPS, then it was a Windows version of CAPS, and then the company decided to spend their energy coming up with a less capable but more consumer-friendly tool called HotDocs. And that was all around 1989 through 1991 in those days. I think you mentioned earlier that the document automation world just began to explode about the same time. There had been Jim Sproul of the American Bar Foundation developed a ABF processor, which was quite popular in the day. And I remember in 1988, we had a conference in Toronto hosted by Faskins. And there were literally 8 or 10 commercial document automation vendors presenting, showing their wares, doing kind of a bake-off in those days. So we often think now we're just confronted with so many choices, but it goes back at least 30 some years, maybe more, to the early 90s.
But that early version of document automation with the mini computer, that was like 84. Was it that far back?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
84. Yeah. So I think that actually their work at Brigham Young and in Chicago at the Chicago Kent Law School really happened in the late 70s. So by 84, we were already somewhat latecomers to the game of legal automation. Yeah.
So yeah, 40 plus years that this technology has been around, and
it's kind of scary.
Well, but it's been extremely useful and productive, and I like that you mentioned that there were a number of vendors back then that were kind of hitting the scene trying to make something of it, and
yeah,
it's happening yet again, probably for the 4th or 5th generation of it. Yeah. Okay, so that was kind of diving down into you're working as an assistant professor at the time.
No, I was never at Harvard. I was never really a professor. I was kind of what I would call a power professor. I co-taught courses unofficially, and I did one semester at Franklin Pierce Law Center in New Hampshire, doing an early course using the Mac operating system, and students were building hypercard stacks and other things. But it was another example. It was really my first example of this maker style approach where, okay, kids, let's get in and let's build something, and make it work and see what you learn through that process.
Did your work in poverty law coincide with that? When was the timing of that?
Yeah, my poverty law work was right after law school. I did clerk for a judge for a year in New York City in the Southern District, who I learned many years later, his earlier clerk was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I was sitting at the desk she used to work at, but 15 years before me. But then I went into legal aid. I was doing poverty law in Massachusetts, landlord-tenant and family law and that kind of stuff. Very little use of technology by me, certainly. But then once we got into Project Pericles, one of the main agendas was how can we supercharge legal service delivery? So we built all these tools using that CAP system I mentioned. We built a divorce system and an eviction defense system and a bankruptcy system and all these other kind of tools, and put it in the hands of the student practitioners who are out in the urban legal service delivery contexts serving clients, so they could serve their clients more effectively.
That's an interesting model. Back then, were people talking about UPL? Were they talking about, like, was there a fear of that? Because I'm sure that's probably a theme that's come up before.
It's a theme that came up later in my life. I mean, back in those days, I don't remember there being too much concern. I think because in some ways the computers weren't as scary. They weren't as threatening to the bar. But by the 90s, that became a little different, and certainly in the 2000s. And that's one of my own side agendas, is just sort of understanding and trying to proselytize for what I would consider a more progressive view about UPL, which is don't apply it to machines. Don't apply it to software as artifacts of human ingenuity, as works of authorship. They should be protected by the First Amendment. Well, that's a much longer conversation.
Well, I don't mind having more of that conversation because coincidentally, yesterday, although he'd authored it, I think in May, Ed Walters released an article that he had written about UPL and whether or not it still makes sense and it's relevant today, and the vagueness and ambiguity of it. And then also yesterday, I had an Access to Justice panel discussion with Quentin Steenhouse, Natalie Ann Knowlton, and Maya Markovich. And we were also talking about UPL and its relevance and stuff. So I would love to get your input and hear more about that. Like,
Yeah.
Do you think that now's the time? Is it possible that we can have a new alternative view?
Unclear. I know the three folks who were on your panel. I signed up for it, but I had a conflict, so I didn't get to hear it. In some ways, I think it's getting more central as an issue. We're faced with this incredible gap between access to legal assistance and legal help. At the same time, we've got machines that are more and more capable of helping deliver that kind of help. I find most lawyers, even progressive lawyers, like probably your panel, I'm not sure what their current point of view is, tend to take a very pro-regulatory, almost turf protectionist approach, saying we need to protect people from these machines. We lawyers know best. I tend to fall in the opposite camp, which is, there are plenty of things in the world that are dangerous, but we have big problems, and we have new tools, and I think this kind of technology should be given much freer rein, and the bar is the last place I would look to regulate it properly. Just too many opportunities for self-dealing, frankly, when lawyers are being asked whether alternative delivery systems should be allowed and should be authorized. So I'm kind of a First Amendment absolutist, which puts me in a small minority, I think, of commentators on this topic.
Well, you're not the only one. We were definitely not, all of us were not in the protectionist camp.
Okay.
All very much looking to do what we claim we're supposed to be doing according to our, the preamble to our ethics rules, which is that we're there to actually help people and as many people as possible, not just those people that can pay us. And there's even some people that can pay, but they can't. It's not just a sustainable business model, but when you can scale things with these types of systems, it becomes more affordable and possible to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think the answer is both enabling the practitioners, making lawyers more effective to deliver more services, but also enabling the self-helper as much legal work as they can on their own. And if there are bad players out there trying to fool people into thinking this is a substitute for a lawyer, that can be prosecuted under consumer protection laws and other ways to remedy it. But prior restraint, where the bar basically says, sorry, guys, unless you are pre-certified or unless you fall within a special ambit of our protected sphere here, you can't do it. I just think that's wrongheaded and bad policy. But to your point about the timing, I think in some ways, I convinced myself about 10 years ago, these expert systems, document assembly systems, other kinds of conventional software should be treated as works of authorship, akin to writing a book or a videotape or a podcast, and freely protected by the First Amendment. But nowadays, with the next generation, with generative AI, there's really no human composition of the software. It's a machine itself that's sort of composing and learning. And that I think that does change the analysis. It makes it harder to defend some of these tools as pure works of human authorship that need to be respected out of rights of free expression. So I'm trying to resist the urge to write another article about this and address the current landscape, which I think does change it in some interesting ways.
Well, forgive me if I urge you to write it, because I think that's it's needed. One thing I'll point out is just some food for thought. Is, in doing some presentations that have touched on this, I had a look at the ABA's definition of UPL.
Oh.
And when you look at it with a fine-tooth comb, as we do as lawyers, it talks about, whatever services, gives some examples that require, the end part says that require the experience and education of a lawyer, a licensed lawyer. And so that require is very interesting.
Yeah.
One could argue that at this moment in time, it's no longer required to have a lawyer involved with that learning and education, but that there's alternative substitutes at this point, or just alternatives to that person. And in that sense, it would not be UPL because it's an alternative.
Yeah, that's an interesting loophole. I think every state's got their own definition, and to some cases, I think you can avoid UPL just simply by saying, "Hey, this is not practice of law in any meaningful sense. Practice of law is a trusting relationship between two or more humans. A creative bar association that was determined to suppress alternative forms of service delivery could probably come up with a more defensible definition. And then we would need to revert to more constitutional and broad policy analysis, I think, to actually answer the question, as opposed to parsing the wording of the particular state statute or regulation, whatever it may be.
Yeah, there's definitely there's going to a fight to be met and a battle to be had over that. Yeah. But I know we digressed a little bit. So you had gone to work on poverty law that at the beginning, not so much use of technology in that regard, but later on, you did employ it, and there were different applications of it for different practice areas.
Absolutely, yeah. And then probably the most impactful example of that I've been involved with is this thing called Law Help Interactive, which began around the year 2000, 2001 or two. And it was basically, okay, we've got this huge legal services delivery problem. We've got this increasingly powerful technology. How can we build a enabling platform that can be used nationally as kind of a jukebox in the sky to run these different applications people can create, make the process of creating applications for document automation and guidance interviews as frictionless as possible. And so we managed to get funding from the Legal Services Corporation and eventually other organizations to fund this thing. Well, Pro Bono Net in New York took it over around 2006. And it's just grown exponentially ever since. We're now up to 1 million customized document packages a year for free around the country. Wow. Using frankly technology that was already somewhat dated in the 90s. But it does the job. And so if somebody's seeking a protective order in Washington State, or being evicted in Idaho, or trying to get a divorce in Florida or wherever, they often can find a module on this system that will help them analyze the facts, generate the documents, guide them through the process, in some cases even e-file the results. So that's been very gratifying. It's continued to grow, but it's still a very tiny fraction of the need out there for this kind of help.
That's fantastic. So that kind of marks the transition to Capstone, right?
Yeah, Capstone predated it, but yeah, Capstone has been my day job, kind of my base consulting practice through these years as I bounced around doing other things. And as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of a diverse group of talented people working on all kinds of different client contexts, whether we're doing mortgage finance for a big law firm, or doing an eviction defense system for a legal aid program, or helping a court put out pro se materials to help their litigants do a little better job interacting with the court system. But it's the basic game is still using this kind of technology, a range of tools like Hot Docs and Contract Express and Exari and et cetera, whatever the product du jour is, to build applications to get legal work done, whether it's for a lawyer, a paralegal, or a self-representing litigant.
Let's take a moment to go into that a little bit more, because I mean, I know as well as having started my own business, it's not something that one does on a lark. There's quite a bit of risk involved in that, and committing oneself to it, it's a lot of work. It's more work than just working for someone else. Yeah. How did that come about? How did Capstone become a thing that you put out in the world, and why? Was there some initial contact that you had with people where they said, hey, that kind of stuff that you're working on, we could really make use of that? Or what was the story around its origin?
Yeah, I was still working at Harvard. I was working part-time in a variety of roles, a senior research associate job I had for a while, and building these kinds of applications in the law school context. And I started noticing, hey, there's opportunities in the commercial sector as well to do these. And I found a colleague who was working at a firm in Boston, and we joined together and formed a company, the original Capstone. He then moved out to the Southwest a couple of years later and split off, and I created the current version of Capstone Practice Systems. But it was really, I was giving up on academia like I had given up on technology 10 or 20 years earlier. It's like, I'm kind of tired of this. Law schools really don't get it. Maybe I should go out and do consulting for a while, and both for the income and for the variety of experiences. And that's where it began. And I've recruited a number of great colleagues over the years, and we're a virtual little consulting shop. Some days we're working for a big New York law firm. Other days we're working for a solo practitioner on Cape Cod or elsewhere, and just doing the whole range of legal practice areas, frankly, as opposed to focusing on anyone in specifically.
Do you think, by the way, that your education, like coming at it from music and philosophy, and then taking the turn into law school, and do you think that kind of breadth of experience has helped you, has aided you in being able to approach this in a different point of view?
I think it's both helped and hurt. I think it's given me a sort of interdisciplinary contrarian mindset, I think, where I really enjoy a large variety of ideas and contexts. But it also, results in a loss of focus. I tend to be too interested in too many different things simultaneously, which I can talk at some point about my other startup called All About Choice, which is an example of an enthusiasm I have for decision support systems, but I haven't done it justice because I've been too distracted by my many other engagements and activities.
Well, that's kind of meta, isn't it? That the business that's supposed to be about focusing on different choices is like,
yeah, no, right. I need to apply that methodology to my own head, probably more than I have.
Well, okay, this might naturally lead into that question I had about obstacles.
Yeah.
Is there an obstacle through the journey that we talked about so far, or something more recent where you've had to deal with it, and it might be something that the audience has experienced or not, and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, I don't have a specific answer for that. I think certainly there's one general obstacle is the resistance of lawyers, whether they're in law firms or in law school faculties, to embrace novelty, to embrace new things, new ideas. So I certainly perceived that when I was at Harvard. It just may be that my personality was not such that I was embraced as an ambassador of this new generation of technology, but people just weren't interested. It was like, okay, yeah, that's nice. And I think, as you probably are finding, law firms, lawyers are professional skeptics. They tend not to be very accepting of cool new things unless they are particularly enthused about some particular thing. But as a whole, they tend not to be. So I think obstacles are just, how do you counteract that inertia? And the third context where I see that is in legal services, legal aid programs. I think a lot of career legal aid lawyers are there because they love the humanistic dimensions of what they do. I gave a keynote at a conference a number of years back to about 500 legal aid lawyers. And I was extolling the virtues of working smart and how can we serve more clients through technology. And after the talk, a lawyer came up to me and gave me a 3-page letter she had written, telling me why it was a bad idea.
Wait, she invested the time to put together a 3-page letter and waited for you to hand it to you?
Yeah. So it really struck me, but it was a great reminder that for a lot of people who've dedicated their lives to service and helping people who can't help themselves or can't afford lawyers, the notion of pointing them to a URL or giving them an access to a piece of software is disheartening. And I think there's a message there. So I think that's both an obstacle and a lesson that we should pay attention to the friction we're all encountering as we try to take advantage of what we think are positive improvements.
Yeah, it's interesting that is also a common theme, because with me, LawDroid's been an 8-year journey, but yeah, it's definitely something I've experienced over all that, and even before then, I worked, like I had a couple of experiments that I tried to take out to lawyers 10, 12 years ago that experienced the same thing. But it does feel that, I don't know that the dam's broken, but With ChatGPT, it's definitely set the popular world on fire in terms of interest, and I think lawyers have gotten some have gotten enthusiastic about it, but they can't ignore anymore the reality of it having an effect on everyone else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was impressed. You mentioned, I think, the other day, having done a 6-hour CLE on generative AI. It's like, wow, that's a full-time job. And next week you'll have to change your curriculum probably.
Yeah, in fact, I had put the slides together about a month ago, and even some of the slides, like I had to update the audience about it, but that was quite a marathon. I'm just glad that's completed. Check the box on that.
But I agree. I agree that the new enthusiasm. So I think people can't ignore the power of this latest round of AI. It's no longer ignorable. Whether that's going to result in adoption and good use, I think remains to be seen. But we've got their attention, at least. Yeah, attention is a good start.
And attention is all you need, right? For transformer technology is the paper that they released. But let me ask you a little bit about generative AI, because
Yeah.
from all of your experience using good old fashioned AI and document automation, now
Yeah.
that this generative AI layer has been around now for a year and a half, what do you see? Like, is it just people caught up in the hype and magic of it, or does it actually provide a more useful layer? And that useful layer that it provides, what would you say it's useful for?
Well, it's probably more useful than anything we've seen so far in terms of the range of tasks it can assist with, unquestionably. It's just mind-blowing what its capacities are. My own personal angle on all this is very much one of how do we combine the latest forms of generative AI with traditional good old-fashioned AI, symbolic means, the so-called neurosymbolic approach. And so are there ways in which we can, it's really a three-legged stool of generative AI, machine learning-based large language models with symbolic systems, expert systems, rule-based systems, other ways of encoding knowledge explicitly in symbolic form, and humans. And how do we construct architectures that allow us to use the best of all three? To me, that's the current holy grail is the neurosymbolic plus human equation. And I'm just beginning to think about ways to do that. But we're having a conference next month in Chicago, the so-called Subtech conference that I helped start a long time ago. It's going to be at Northwestern Law School with Dan Linna and company. One of the themes there is exactly this. How do we, as law professors, as legal researchers, how do we embrace the latest technologies while also not losing the advantages of the earlier ones and construct this fabric of this sort of three-way fabric, to my mind, of optimal service delivery?
Yeah, I agree with you. That is the real challenge. And thank you for kind of enlightening me to that, because I think a lot of us, right, especially ones that are in the echo chamber of LinkedIn and legal tech, that we kind of look at, what we're working on, but seeing the overview in terms of the human tech dynamic, because that's the future. The future is going to be that, regardless of how much the technology advances. And that's the real challenge too, is how we're going to work in a world that makes best use of these things, but still requires our input and has our input. It might make people feel better too, to know that there is a future that has that.
Yeah. I'm very bullish on humanity. I think human lawyers and human legal professionals more generally have got a great future. They shouldn't be afraid of this technology. They should embrace it, but they can also supplement it and use it most effectively together. Kat Moon, she's doing a little conference on the Future of Law Association at Vanderbilt later in July. And I've got a little talk there titled The Societies of Legal Minds. And the idea is really two points. One is, very quickly, one is, in order for our artificial minds to be more competent and to do legal work we're proud of, it needs to embrace a whole variety of subminds, this whole Marvin Minsky idea of the society of mind, that our mentality is composed of many different modules that connect. And so large language models are one kind of module. Expert systems and rule-based systems and other ways of expressing knowledge affirmatively are another. We need all these things together to make a society of mind for law. But on the other point is, we lawyers and other professionals are going to have to work in an environment where we're in a society of minds, some of which are artificial, right? So we're going to have many different virtual assistants off doing things for us, and learning the new skill of how to navigate in that world. So anyway, I'm just starting to think about how to present that idea, but I'll fill 10 minutes with something about societies and legal minds.
I love that, and I see how the philosophy is coming back into play there. And yeah, I love Cat Moon.
Yeah.
And Vanderbilt has been on fire lately.
Oh yeah.
They multiple different courses that they have on AI prompting. I actually took the summer of I think it was called the Summer of AI, where it was like a 9-part course, and they actually got you into the Python programming and all that. That was pretty cool.
Uh-huh.
And then they recently released that open source AI tool that they've been using across the campus. And I know that Kat right now is in Europe giving a number of speeches on AI in the law. So it's just extremely impressive.
Very encouraging. I mean, there's multiple centers like this: Suffolk and Vanderbilt, Stanford, of course, Berkeley. It's really great to see just explosions of enthusiasm around these topics in the legal academy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me not leave Suffolk out of it, because Quentin was on the panel, and
yeah,
the lab that you have and the amount of work, and actually now I think they have been using DocAssemble as their document automation, but it sounds like Quentin has actually been creating some more advanced stuff, layering it on top of it with generative AI, and that sounds opening the doors even more so. So that's
that's a great job. David Colarusso and Quentin and others really are doing path-breaking work there. I basically parachute in and do my courses, and they're friends of mine, but I can't take any credit for anything they're doing in the LIT lab, the Legal Information and Technology lab. They're very lit.
Yeah, David Colarusso is awesome. I know that he actually built that little text-based program that essentially is like a chatbot that you could easily create your own thing. And yeah, he's also just a very nice person, as is Quentin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, David's thing is Q&A markup, and it's a very, very intuitive little tool. I have students use that. It's one of their course projects. They create simple chatbots. So anyway, so it's hard to keep up with all these different centers, and that's just the U.S., right? We've got the same thing going on in the Netherlands and Germany and Italy and France and South America and China and that brings me back to the Subtech conference I mentioned, which has always aspired to bring together people from around the world who basically are a committee of one at their home institution. But then they come together and every couple of years we compare notes about, hey, what's going on in Peru or in Estonia or wherever we may be.
So do you think, based on all of that now is different? That there's a critical mass that's building now in terms of, let's say, the UPL issue being rethought, or just even putting regulation aside, that this is just going to happen anyways, or is already happening, and people getting advice from something like ChatGPT without having to go through lawyers? Do you think this time is different?
Yeah, it's different. It's got a lot of similarities. I felt that way in the 80s and 90s, oh my God, this is going to explode. The world's going to be transformed any day now. So I tend to, need to bridle myself in my enthusiasm, but it does feel different. It feels better. It feels more accelerated. And UPL specifically, when we're not dealing with law-specific guidance tools like we had been in past UPL battles, like LegalZoom and others, but with general purpose AI systems, Gemini and Claude and everything else. How is the bar going to suppress those? If someone happens to ask a legal question to a generic LLM, what are you going to do? Get an injunction against Google or an injunction against OpenAI from letting people ask legal questions? I'm sure they'll try, but it seems like it's more of an uphill battle than it ever was.
Well, I'd like to change gears a little bit and ask you about your book, because you wrote the book on Work Smarter with Knowledge Tools. And I believe I saw that on Amazon, just checking on that before the show.
Uh-huh.
If people are interested in learning more about how to create that mix, right, of using these types of tools along with their practice, what could they learn from that?
Well, the book was done in a second edition back in 2021, so it doesn't have the word generative AI in it or the phrase. I'll have to probably do a new edition, but it's really a general purpose introduction to how lawyers and law students and other legal professionals can enlist modern technology to do some of the work they're doing, and why and how. What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the costs? So it's kind of a survey of tools that are out there or were out there in 2021, and of methodologies for doing it. How do you embrace this notion of working harder, not smarter, not harder?
Well, that's great. It sounds like for anyone in the audience watching or listening to this, if you want to take a deep dive into Marc's mind and expand on all the topics we've been learning about right now, Work Smarter with Knowledge Tools. It is available on Amazon, and
I do recommend it. Even though there may be another edition someday, probably not anytime soon. So it's good. It's a good read. It's not technical at all. It's really a high level for the average practitioner who's interested to learn more.
I do want to ask you a little bit about your leadership, because you both been involved with the College of Law Practice Management and the e-lawyering task force. I would imagine that you took a lot of these lessons learned that we've been talking about and brought that into the e-lawyering task force. Like, what is that, by the way? And it sounds like like an A-team van that pulls up and the e-lawyering task force jumps out.
We're here to help. Yeah, like the government. It doesn't exist anymore, as far as I know. It was something that Jim Kane. You may have heard of the Jim Kane Award from the ABI. They give out to everybody who does e-lawyering. He was the original founder. Then Richard Grannon and I became co-chairs, probably in the early 2000s. For about 10 years, we just tried to steer the American Bar Association into this new realm of delivery of services for lawyers through the web. Stephanie Kimbrough and other people were out there doing this work, right? And so we would hold regular meetings. We'd give presentations at Tech Show and other ABA events. Every time we had a law practice management section meeting somewhere in the country, we'd reach out to a local law school and bring a delegation from the e-lawyering task force out to tell law students about this technology. And as somebody remarked at one point, we're the longest running task force in history. Eventually was retired, like, hey, this is a task force. Aren't you done with your task? So it was a wonderful ride. I think we did a lot of good, but it kind of faded into oblivion 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, but I would say it's probably the inspiration for the Center for Innovation.
Probably some connection. Yeah, I think that carried forward a lot of the same spirits, right? How do we accept and leverage all the goods that technology are laying at our feet as lawyers?
Well, I can tell you personally that when I hung out my own shingle in 2006, there was only so far that I would get with Jay Foonberg's book about solo practice, which was still applicable back then, but I was a big technology fan. And so you, Richard Grant, and Stephanie Kimbrough, seeing what you all were doing, it was very inspirational to me at the time.
That's very good to hear. Jay Foonberg would occasionally come to our meetings, so it's another connection back to an earlier era.
Yeah, I mean, he's OG. Like he systematized the office and made it something. When you put the logic and the reasoning and the rationale and like all the structure of his book aside, what it really did, and the stuff that all of you have done, is you've made it more familiar. You made it less scary, so that it's something that you can get into and have somebody who's guiding you through it. Not that you're going out there into the wild blue yonder and you're not quite sure if you're going to come back.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny, even though I've had a long career, throughout my career, I've always looked back at predecessors and earlier pioneers. And people like Roberto Ramo, who was the president of the American Bar Association back in the 70s, she had a wonderful, influential book called How to Create a System. It was purely paper, but basically, how do you systematize law practice with a master question list and various document templates? And a lot of that flowed immediately and naturally into the expert system and document automation world when finally the technology enabled us to make these things operative as opposed to static words on paper.
And I think that's one thing that's hard for lawyers that are looking to take advantage of these technologies is that you do initially have to put in some of the hard work of thinking through like what is it that I'm doing? Because you can't improve it unless you actually have an awareness of what you're doing, because only then can you kind of look at the different parts and break down what's conducive to one thing or another.
To me, that's one of my favorite parts of all this cool technology is what it does to us as humans to make us reflective practitioners. How can we be creative and reflective practitioners, understanding what we can do naturally as humans and what machines can do as well or better than us, and seeing that equation constantly evolve as the technology gets smarter.
Just related to that, what are some other like key lessons that you've learned from your experience that you think that would be good to share?
I'm always stumped when I get that question, so I don't have a specific answer. I'm still learning, and let's put it that way.
Well, that's fair. We all are.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me put it this way. I'm certain because part of the audience, there's lawyers, but there's also a number of founders within the legal tech space that tend to watch these episodes. And if there's somebody that maybe is even before that, where they're kind of thinking this through, like, do I want to get into legal technology? Do I want to do something that's going to possibly change the way people perceive technology within the legal space? Would you have any advice for them about maybe 2 or 3 things that they should think about in making that choice?
Probably my best advice is to find fellow travelers. There are more and more opportunities to encounter people that are doing something very similar to what you're doing. Reach out. Don't pigeonhole yourself. One of the things that bothers me the most when I see a new legal tech startup is where they're reinventing something that has already been out there for a while. And it's like, come on, guys, take a moment to look around, do some competitive analysis, be aware that your great idea may not be as unique as you may think. Spend some time exploring comparable work other people are doing. That to me, that's maybe one of the strongest lessons because I see it being missed all the time. And it goes along with just getting involved in the community, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn or other contexts. More and more opportunities to find people that have traveled the path you're considering to travel before you, and some of them have arrows in their backs, and others are still standing, and embrace them. But I'm coming up with short on a broader set of advice or standards. I think it's find your own path, but also pay attention to other people that have on a similar path before.
I think that's great advice. You got to read the room, but you also, in order to read the room, you need to know the people in it. And I wholeheartedly agree on the community thing because I've learned so much from everyone that I've met, including you in this talk and over the years. Sometimes people I don't know, as far as the tech part, I think they might feel like if I share what I'm up to, they're going to steal my ID or something like that, and have that kind of protectionist thing. But I found that approach is very short-sighted. And but that said, the elbows maybe have gotten a little sharper lately with the stakes getting higher, or at least perceived to get higher. But I hope that doesn't adversely impact the community because it's a very special one that we have here.
It is a special one, and I think you're right about the stakes. We're talking about, we see people getting $100 million investments and evaluations in legal tech startups, it's like, wow, this is scary. I better be careful with my brilliant idea. But I think I fall prey to that same vulnerability where you think you've got something that's really different and unique. You want to protect it, when the reality is no one's going to steal it from you. you're you have a much better chance of actually bringing it to life if you just go forth and let let the light shine.
Well, Mark, as we're coming to the end here, like, are there any final thoughts? Like, is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with the audience?
Uh, Probably not today. But thank you for the time. It's been wonderful. I think what you're doing is great. And I'm very happy to talk and reminisce a bit about the history of technology. I plan to be here for another 40 or 50 years myself. So, and I'm personally looking for a new gig. I'm interested in finding a new adventure, frankly. So that might be worth people knowing. I just want to immerse myself in some new twist and turn in my zigzagging career. I enjoy what I'm doing, but I'd also like to find something really new and different to totally escape into for a couple of years. So if someone knows something like that, please be in touch. I'm easy to find just by my name anywhere. You can find my email and my presence on various social media.
Well, and yeah, for that, by the way, keep Mark in mind. How could they keep in touch with you? Like, what is your email address and what's a good website?
Just Marc marc@capstonepractice.com is my standard email, and I'm Marc Lauritsen at Twitter and also I think on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, as a fellow traveler along that crazy zigzag journey, it's been a pleasure spending time with you, Mark.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.